Candidates are almost out of time when it comes to convincing the voters. Here's just a sample of what they had to say this week.
The elephant in the room. I had a stroke. He's never let me forget that.
There should not be involvement from the federal government in how states decide their abortion decisions. I want women, doctors, local political leaders.
Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I think that marriage ought to be between a man and a woman.
And you got people who are afraid of being pushed in front of oncoming subway cars. They're being stabbed, beaten to death on the street with hammers.
Yes or no, Ron? Will you serve a full 4-year term if you're reelected governor of Florida? It's not a tough question. It's a fair question. He won't tell you.
The only worn-out old donkey I'm looking to put out to pasture is Charlie Crist.
Well, we have got a great Friday Nightcap panel here tonight, and we're going to start with a final midterm preview. Anand Giridharadas joins us, MSNBC political analyst and author of the new must-read, The Persuaders, at the front lines of the fight for hearts, minds, and democracy. My dear friend, actress, activist, and author Amber Tamblyn, her new book, Listening in the Dark, Women Reclaiming the Power of Intuition, is out now. MSNBC legal analyst Charles Coleman, he's a civil rights attorney and the host of the Charles Coleman podcast. And David Gura is here, NPR's business correspondent. Let's talk about this week we just had. We are ending with poll watchers carrying guns and with Nancy Pelosi's husband being attacked in his home by a potentially politically motivated attacker. How much trouble are we in?
I mean, I think I have been trying to suggest to people that this is not, I think as many of us now recognize, a contest between different tax rates or different healthcare policy proposals. This is a contest between part of the country that believes in continued and expanded liberal democracy, an effort to pursue a more perfect union, and a part of the country that is now attracted to the idea of fascism in the United States. And when you see violence being normalized like this, second in line to the presidency is Nancy Pelosi in her home, the attackers looking for her, allegedly. We are seeing a normalization of violence. And I think if people want to live in a country defined by the core idea of democracy, which is that we choose the future together through talking about things, not with hammers, it's going to be incredibly important to vote accordingly.
Okay, but that same party, they're immediately going to spin. They've already started to. Saying, look what happened to Paul Pelosi. See, it's violence in Joe Biden's America. When, first of all, the most violent cities are in red cities and states.
Absolutely. I think we're in a very scary time where everyone is feeling very numb to a lot of these conversations. My hope is that we can sort of resensitize our base and the Democratic Party and young voters especially to understand that things are not actually going to get better. Things are going to continue down this path. This is a long, old, sustained war that has been going on against the frontier of our bodies, our stories, our rights. And in order for us to fight against that, we have to be really present. We have to show up and vote. But we also have to find new ways to sort of be in community with each other and in communication with each other.
But isn't the numbness the problem? That there's so many people that aren't at risk, people of privilege who are kind of ignoring this and getting tied up on things like taxes when the future of our democracy is at risk.
The attack itself is so startling. An 82-year-old person attacked in this way. We woke up to that news. I think almost as startling is just the response to it. And so you had members of the Democratic Party expressing outrage at what had happened. It was torturous, waiting to see how Republicans would respond to this. And I think that's indicative of what Anand is talking about, how normalized the violence has become, that the impulse to recognize how deeply wrong this isn't there anymore. And I don't know how that party picks themselves up and sees as a result of that. That's right, or something that the way that they should be approaching an instance so grave and terrible as this.
Then what do Democrats need to do in these final 2 weeks? What does their message need to be?
Well, I think we have to make it very clear to the public that this, as we said, is not a conversation about tax brackets. It's not a conversation about, where you sit on the spectrum. This is a conversation about the future of American democracy, period. And I think one of the challenges that we are overlooking quite squarely is that we're talking about an opponent, we're talking about an alternative side, we're talking about competing ideologies for whom facts do not matter. And if there's any challenge, that's the biggest challenge. You can't have a reasoned discussion with people who are not willing to listen to facts. You cannot have a reasoned discussion with people who are going to be okay absolving themselves of responsibility and accountability when the data does not support it. We have sensationalized crime. We have radicalized crime in terms of the narrative and how we go about discussing it in America. And that's why we're having this discussion that we're having now across the board. Republicans have been able to weaponize the conversation around crime in America simply because, number one, they don't understand it. And then number two, they're content to spew a narrative that is not based in data and not based in fact.
I think on that point, there's an important detail in this story of this attack today that really stuck with me and to me felt like just a biopsy of America. And that is this attacker apparently was radicalized on Facebook with big lie election stuff and COVID stuff and all the disinformation. Mark Zuckerberg has allowed that to flourish because he's too greedy to shut down.
As has Congress.
As has Congress, as have other social media billionaire barons. And so Mark Zuckerberg profits. This disinformation flies. This man, David DePape, is radicalized, spreading MyPillow big lie stuff. And then, when this attack happens, Paul Pelosi ends up at Zuckerberg General Hospital in San Francisco. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much for donating a small fraction of the money you made poisoning the information system in this country, a small fraction donated to treating the wounds that you have helped cause.
David, right now, economy is on the minds of the American people. So Charles is right that this is about democracy. It's about something bigger. But when you talk to voters around the country, they are talking about the struggles they're facing with life, you know, getting paycheck to paycheck. What do Democrats do with this? Because Republicans strike fear in their hearts day in and day out, but somehow these voters don't know. You know what Republicans are going to do? Cut your Medicare, cut your Social Security.
It's astonishing. It is the prism through which I look at this midterm election.
You are a nerd.
I am a nerd and a business reporter as well. And to your question about what Democrats do, they do what they've been doing, which is to talk about it. And I think there is empathy and awareness of how this is affecting everyday Americans. That's there, and you hear it from the president on down. Those candidates are talking about this. I think what's startling, we saw this in the aftermath of that GDP report earlier this week, is Republicans are keen and content to criticize how bad the economy is, how difficult it is for Americans, but there's no substance behind that. And
why don't voters ask for more substance behind it?
They're distracted by all of these other things, and they think that the alternative is better than what they have at this moment. I don't fault Democrats completely for not conveying that, but Democrats, I don't think, are highlighting enough the fact that there is no Republican plan to bring inflation down, for instance. They'll talk about it till the cows come home and how difficult it is. Democrats will as well. But there is no Republican plan to bring down inflation right now, or one that is that radically different from what the Democrats have proposed.
Amber, this is the first election, the first midterm election since Roe versus Wade was overturned. We saw how energized the country was, women were over the summer. And then I keep reading headlines. They're not as motivated. How could that be?
Well, I think one of the things I want to point out, speaking to the economy as well, is that I think we're forgetting that abortion and this kind of access is an economic issue.
Sure is.
It's a huge economic issue. It's just not a front and center in the moment economic issue. It's not.
It is for a woman who has an unwanted pregnancy.
It is, and also for the sons out there that are going to have to deal with this, the families. It's going to be a whole generation that it's going to make gas and groceries look as difficult and complicated as that. So, I think we have to remember as women and people who are capable of carrying pregnancies that this is a long, old war and that it has been waged for generations and generations, and that we have to have a way to communicate our needs and the truth about the situation as it pertains to what we're going to be able to do going forward. We have to find a way to sort of reconnect with ourselves and, as I said earlier, our communities in an effort to, as Anand was saying, push against the disinformation and keep talking about the things that are true. And one of those things is what I just mentioned about how this is an economic issue, how this is going to affect families on a day-to-day basis. It's not just something that's someone else's problem. It is every single person's problem in this room and that's watching television in general, whether you're watching this show or you're watching Fox News.
Stephanie, I really want to stress how important that is. I, for a very long time, have said that the Democratic Party has a messenger problem But moreover, they have a message problem. And what I mean by that is I talk to apathetic voters or people who are of voting age all the time in community. And part of the problem is that there has not been the connection made as to making these things relevant. I talked about how the narrative around crime, for example, I talked about how that has been sensationalized, and that train has gone off the track. And now you're talking about how this connection between economics and women's reproductive rights has not been made in such a way that makes it real for voters. That is a fundamental flaw of how Democrats have approached election after election after election in such a way where you cannot sell a central message to your voting base in a way that energizes them. It is not just a problem with the messenger, it is a problem with the clarity of the message.
I agree with that so deeply, and that is in many ways the argument of the Persuaders book, which is that this, when you're talking about Dobbs, there was that moment, and then what happened? What happened is Democrats think politics is self-explanatory. Right. And that policy is self-explanatory. If women know this decision has been made by the Supreme Court, then women will fully radicalize themselves, organize themselves, and do the thing you want them to do months out. Nothing actually works like that in politics. And the Republicans understand.
They know that.
You have to organize people.
They know that. They have 3 messages every night on Fox News. Immigration, crime, economy, all day, every day.
And so
3 things.
I spent time with organizers in particular for this book. And the organizers were remarkable because they use this word meaning making to describe what their work is. And their work is to take you from noticing a Supreme Court case, take you from that 1 to the 10 of being ready to lay down in traffic for that issue. Or to take you from the 1 of hearing a story of your friend being mugged, as the right does, to a 10 of like the border needs to be secured or whatever. And the left, frankly, is absent on that kind of meaning making. I would have loved to see President Biden the next week after the Dobbs decision in Texas signing women in at an abortion clinic.
Absolutely.
Show people
agree.
make stunts. The Democrats are struggling to pick fights, as you were talking about, struggling to have messages that galvanize people, and struggling to offer a thrilling alternative to the awfulness of Trumpism. It's not just enough to say those people are dangerous.
All right, we got to leave it there, David. We got to take a quick break. The final message is Democrats need to take the gloves off and start fighting. This group is staying where we are after the break. Kanye, Elon, Trump. We're going to discuss when the 11th hour nightcap continues.